It all began one quiet afternoon. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the scent of garlic and herbs filling the air, when a flicker of movement outside the window caught my eye. Our neighbor, Rachel, was standing at the edge of her yard, talking animatedly to someone. I leaned closer to see better, and that's when I froze. My husband, Mark, was standing there with her, his expression oddly intense. Rachel had always been friendly, too friendly, in fact. She was the kind of person who greeted everyone with a wide smile and lingering eye contact. Mark, on the other hand, was reserved, the kind of man who valued his privacy. Seeing them together like that felt off. I shook the thought away, forcing myself to focus on dinner. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe it was just a casual conversation between neighbors. But as I chopped vegetables, I couldn't help but glance out the window again. This time, I caught Mark reaching out to touch her arm. It was subtle, but the gesture sent a pang of unease through me. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, I studied Mark carefully. He seemed perfectly normal, his usual self, laughing at a joke on TV, asking me about my day. But the image of him with Rachel lingered in my mind, a shadow I couldn't shake. "Did you see Rachel today?" I asked casually, testing the waters. He barely looked up from his plate. "Yeah." We talked for a bit. She needed advice about her fence. "It's falling apart." His answer was reasonable, but his tone felt dismissive, as if he wanted to move past the subject quickly. I let it go, but my unease only deepened. Something wasn't right, and I needed to figure out what it was. The next day, I decided to keep an eye out. If Mark and Rachel were truly just neighbors chatting about a broken fence, there would be nothing to worry about. But if there was more to their interaction, I wanted to know. I positioned myself by the window, pretending to read a book while secretly watching the yard. Hours passed, and I saw nothing unusual, just when I was beginning to feel foolish. I spotted Rachel stepping outside, her phone in hand, moments later. Mark appeared, walking over to her with a small toolbox. They talked for a while, and then something happened that made my stomach twist. They both laughed, a sound so light and carefree that it seemed like a shared secret. Mark leaned in, close enough that their faces were just inches apart. I closed the book and set it down, my hands trembling. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about a fence, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. That evening, I tried to act normal, but the weight of what I had seen lingered like a storm cloud in my mind. Mark came home late, his face flushed from the cold evening air, and gave me his usual smile. But tonight, it didn't warm me the way it used to. There was a subtle tension between us now, a distance I couldn't ignore. "Sorry, I got caught up helping Rachel with her fence," he said, setting his keys on the counter. His tone was casual, but it felt rehearsed. "Oh, you're quite the handyman lately," I replied, trying to sound lighthearted while watching his reaction closely. "Should I be worried about you running off to fix the whole neighborhood?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Just being neighborly. You know how it is." But I didn't know, and that was the problem. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like there was a part of his life I wasn't privy to. Over the next few days, I started noticing little things that didn't sit right. Mark seemed to check his phone more often, smiling faintly at messages he didn't share with me. He started taking evening walks, a new habit that conveniently coincided with Rachel's outdoor routines. And then there was the change in Rachel herself. Her outfit seemed more polished, her lipstick a little brighter whenever Mark was around. I tried to push the doubts aside, telling myself I was overthinking, that there had to be a logical explanation. But the tension gnawed at me, growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I decided to test him. "Mark," I began, keeping my tone casual. Do you ever feel like we don't talk as much as we used to? He glanced at me, surprised. What do you mean? Like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like you're distracted. Is something on your mind? He frowned, reaching for my hand. Hey, don't think that. I've just been busy with work and, helping Rachel and stuff. But you're my priority. Always. His words were sweet, and I wanted to believe them. But the shadow of doubt lingered, refusing to be banished. The breaking point came a few days later. It was a chilly afternoon, and I was returning home early from running errands. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Mark's car wasn't in its usual spot. Instead, it was parked in Rachel's driveway. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at the scene, my heart pounding. I could feel the walls of my carefully constructed reality beginning to crack. Gathering my courage, I stepped out of the car and approached Rachel's house. The curtains were drawn, but through the narrow gap, I could see the two of them inside. They were standing close, too close, their heads bent together as if sharing a secret. Before I could stop myself, I knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the quiet street. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and there stood Rachel, her face a mixture of surprise and discomfort. "Hi," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Is Mark here?" Rachel hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before stepping aside. "He's inside. We were just working on the fence plans." Her explanation sounded hollow, but I nodded and stepped past her into the living room. Mark was standing by the coffee table, his expression shifting from shock to guilt as our eyes met. "What's going on?" I asked, crossing my arms. My voice was calm, but my heart was racing. Mark cleared his throat, his hands fidgeting nervously. "We were just talking about the repairs. That's all." I glanced at the table, where a set of papers was spread out. Sure enough, they appeared to be blueprints for the fence, but something about the scene felt too staged, too perfect, as if they had anticipated this exact moment. Rachel chimed in, her voice overly cheerful. "Mark's been such a lifesaver. I don't know what I'd do without his help." Her words sent a fresh wave of anger through me. "I'm sure you don't," I said, my tone icy. Mark stepped forward, his expression earnest. "Listen, I know this looks bad, but it's not what you think. I was just trying to help." I wanted to believe him, but the image of them standing so close together, their shared laughter, and the secrecy of their interactions made it impossible. "I think we need to go home," I said finally, my voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "Now." Mark nodded, grabbing his coat. He turned to Rachel, who avoided his gaze, and muttered a quick goodbye before following me out the door. The ride home was silent, the air between us thick with tension. As soon as we stepped inside, I turned to face him. "I need the truth. Mark," I said, my voice firm. "What's going on with you and Rachel?" "There's nothing going on," he insisted, his voice rising in frustration. "I've been helping her with her fence. That's all. Why can't you trust me?" "Because you're hiding something," I shot back. "I see the way you look at her, the way she looks at you. If it's so innocent, why do I feel like I'm losing you?" His face softened, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I'm not hiding anything," he said quietly. "But if I've made you feel like you have reason to doubt me, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." His apology felt sincere, but it didn't erase the doubts in my mind. I nodded, my heart heavy with unresolved emotions. "I just need time," I said. "Time to figure out what's real." Mark nodded, stepping forward to take my hand, but I pulled away. I needed space, and I needed answers. Answers I wasn't sure I would ever truly get. That night, I barely slept. Mark and I went to bed in silence, lying side by side but feeling miles apart. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of him standing with Rachel, their laughter, their closeness. Was I overreacting? Or was this the beginning of something I couldn't ignore? When I woke the next morning, Mark had already left for work. His side of the bed was cold, a stark reminder of the growing distance between us. I walked into the kitchen and found a note on the counter. "I love you. Let's talk tonight. I'll make dinner." The words should have comforted me, but instead, they felt hollow. It wasn't just his actions that were troubling me. It was the way they made me question everything I thought I knew about our marriage. I needed clarity, and I knew I wouldn't find it sitting around the house. By mid-morning, I found myself standing outside Rachel's house. My hands trembled as I knocked on the door, a mixture of anger and desperation coursing through me. When she opened the door, her face registered surprise, then a flicker of guilt. "Can we talk?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain calm. Rachel hesitated but stepped aside to let me in. Her living room was immaculate, every detail perfectly curated, but the air between us was anything but welcoming. She gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing, arms crossed. "I need to know what's going on," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Between you and Mark." Her eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. "Nothing is going on. I promise you. Mark's been helping me with the fence and a few other things around the house, but that's it." "Then why does it feel like there's more?" I demanded. "The way you two act around each other, the secrecy, it doesn't add up." Rachel sighed, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. "Look, I won't lie. I enjoy Mark's company. He's easy to talk to. And maybe I've leaned on him a little more than I should. But nothing inappropriate has happened." Her words did little to reassure me. "Do you have feelings for him?" I asked bluntly. Rachel's face turned pale. For a moment, she didn't answer. And in that silence, I found my answer. When Mark came home that evening, I was waiting for him in the living room. The table was set for dinner, the candles lit, but the tension in the air made the room feel cold. "I went to see Rachel today," I said as he walked in. Mark froze, his coat still half off. "What?" "I asked her if there was anything going on between the two of you. Do you want to guess what she said?" His jaw tightened, and he finished pulling off his coat, tossing it onto the couch. "What did she say?" "She admitted that she enjoys your company, that she's leaned on you more than she should have. But when I asked her if she has feelings for you, she couldn't even deny it." Mark's face turned pale, and he sank into the chair across from me. "I didn't know," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I swear, I didn't know she felt that way." "How could you not know?" I demanded. "You've been spending so much time with her. Didn't you notice how she looked at you? How she acted around you?" "I thought she was just being friendly," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I never thought it was anything more, and I definitely never encouraged it." I wanted to believe him, but the doubt still lingered. "Then why didn't you tell me how much time you were spending with her? Why did you keep it from me?" Mark hesitated, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Because I knew how it would look, and I didn't want to upset you over something that felt harmless." His explanation stung, not because it was unreasonable, but because it highlighted the cracks in our relationship, the lack of communication, the unspoken fears. "Do you realize how much this has hurt me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Seeing you with her, not knowing what's going on, it's like I don't even know who you are anymore." Mark reached for my hand, his eyes pleading. "You do know me. I'm still the same person I've always been. I made a mistake, but it was never intentional. please. Let me make it right." "How?" I asked, pulling my hand away. "How do you make something like this right?" "I'll stop helping Rachel," he said immediately. "I'll set boundaries. Whatever it takes to rebuild your trust, I'll do it." His words were earnest, but they didn't erase the pain. "It's not just about Rachel," I said quietly. "It's about us. About why you didn't feel like you could talk to me, and why I'm questioning everything now." Mark nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I get it, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Later that night, as I lay awake in bed, I replayed the day's events in my mind. Rachel's hesitation, Mark's guilt, my own spiraling doubts. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. I didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. Our marriage couldn't survive on half-truths and unspoken fears. The next morning, I made a decision. "We need help," I told Mark over breakfast. "We can't fix this on our own." He nodded without hesitation. "If that's what you want, then I'm in." It wasn't an easy decision, but it was a necessary one. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, not for an immediate solution, but for the possibility of healing. The following week, Mark and I started couples therapy. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew we couldn't keep circling the same arguments, letting the tension grow between us. The first session was awkward. Sitting across from each other with a stranger mediating our pain felt unnatural. But as the hour went on, the counselor's calm demeanor began to chip away at the walls we'd both built. "Trust," she said, leaning forward slightly, "is like a glass jar. Every action, every word, adds or removes marbles from that jar. What do you think has removed marbles from yours?" Mark was the first to speak. "Not telling her about the time I was spending with Rachel? I thought I was protecting her, but I see now that I was just creating doubt." His honesty surprised me, but it didn't erase the hurt. "And for me," I said slowly, "it's the secrecy. The feeling that there's a part of his life I'm not allowed to see. It makes me question everything." The counselor nodded. "Those are valid feelings, but trust can be rebuilt. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's possible if you're both committed." Mark reached for my hand, his grip firm but gentle. "I am committed. I'll do whatever it takes." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. One of the first steps we agreed on was setting boundaries with Rachel. That evening, Mark and I stood at her doorstep together, ready to have the conversation I'd been dreading. When she opened the door, her face lit up with surprise, and then uncertainty when she saw me standing beside Mark. "Can we come in?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Rachel stepped aside, and we entered her impeccably decorated living room. The tension was palpable as we sat down, the three of us navigating the unspoken discomfort. Mark was the first to speak. "Rachel, I need to apologize if I gave you the wrong impression. I've enjoyed helping you out, but it's clear that it's caused problems in my marriage, and I can't let that happen." Rachel's expression shifted, hurt, embarrassment, and perhaps a touch of anger flashing across her face. "I never meant to cause any trouble," she said quietly. "I guess I just didn't realize." I interrupted gently. "Rachel, I appreciate your honesty, but we need to take a step back. For now, it's best if Mark and I focus on us." She nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I understand. I'm sorry for any pain I've caused. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start." As we left her house, Mark squeezed my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the same team. Despite the progress we were making, the doubts in my mind didn't vanish overnight. Late at night, when Mark was asleep beside me, I'd find myself scrolling through memories, replaying every interaction I'd seen between him and Rachel. Was I being too harsh, or was I still missing something? One night, unable to sleep, I got up and walked into the living room. The diary Rachel had once left on her coffee table haunted me, though I had no proof it existed. I needed answers, but I also needed to let go. Mark found me sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. "You okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "I don't know," I admitted. "I keep thinking about everything, trying to find the truth, but it's exhausting." He sat beside me, his warmth grounding me. "What can I do to help?" His willingness to meet me in my pain was a reminder of the man I'd fallen in love with. "Just keep being honest," I said, "even if it's hard." The next day, I received a call from Rachel. Her voice was hesitant, almost fragile. "Can we meet? I want to clear the air." I hesitated but agreed. We met at a coffee shop, the neutral setting offering a strange sense of security. Rachel looked nervous as she sat across from me, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. "I owe you the truth," she began, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for things to get so complicated. But I did develop feelings for Mark. I didn't act on them. And he didn't encourage them. But they were there." Her admission was both a relief and a blow. It confirmed my suspicions, but also clarified that Mark hadn't betrayed me. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I want to move forward," she said. "And I don't want you to think there was more to it than there was. I'm sorry for everything." I nodded, her words sinking in. "Thank you for being honest," I said finally. "But it's going to take time to heal." When I told Mark about my meeting with Rachel, his relief was palpable. "I told you," he said softly. "I never encouraged her feelings. I only want you." "I know," I replied, "but trust takes time, and I need you to keep showing me that I'm the only one." "I will," he promised, his voice steady. "Every day." That night, as we sat together on the couch, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I believed we could navigate it together. The days that followed felt lighter, as though we'd taken a collective breath after weeks of suffocating tension. But the road ahead wasn't without its bumps. Trust is fragile, and every small interaction felt like a test of Mark's honesty, of my willingness to believe, and of our ability to truly move forward. Mark started making small but meaningful gestures. He left his phone on the counter instead of keeping it in his pocket, and he made a point of telling me about his day in detail, no matter how mundane. At first, I questioned his motives. Was he overcompensating? Was this all an act? But as the weeks went by, I realized that he was doing it not out of guilt, but out of a genuine desire to rebuild the connection between us. One evening, he surprised me with a photo album. "Remember these?" he asked, sitting beside me on the couch and flipping through the pages. The images were a montage of our life together: vacations, family dinners, quiet moments at home. I smiled, my heart swelling with a mixture of nostalgia and sadness. "We were happy then," I said softly. "We can be happy again," he replied, his voice steady. "But it starts with us, together." Forgiveness didn't come in a grand moment of clarity. It was slow, creeping in during the quiet moments we shared, like when he'd reach for my hand during a walk, or when he'd make my coffee just the way I liked it without me asking. It was in his unwavering patience, his willingness to answer my questions, no matter how many times I asked. One day, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I turned to him and said, "I forgive you." His eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked like he didn't believe me. "You do?" he asked. his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. I do. But I also forgive myself for doubting, for not trusting sooner. We both made mistakes. Mark, but I think we're stronger for it now. He reached for my hand, holding it tightly. I'll never stop proving to you how much you mean to me. And in that moment, I believed him. Rachel moved a few months later. She sent a polite note, wishing us well and apologizing once again for the part she played in our struggles. I didn't reply, but I felt a sense of closure knowing she was starting fresh somewhere else. Mark and I took our own steps toward renewal. We started going to therapy, not just as a couple, but individually, working through the insecurities and patterns that had led us to this place. It was hard, but it was worth it. One evening, Mark surprised me with tickets to the mountains, a weekend getaway to the place where we'd spent our honeymoon years ago. I thought we could use some time to reconnect, he said, his smile hopeful. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it, cozy, secluded, surrounded by the whispering pines. We spent the days hiking, laughing, and rediscovering the little things that had drawn us together in the first place. At night, we sat by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, the glow of the flames reflecting in his eyes. On our last night, Mark handed me a small bike-wrapped box. I raised an eyebrow. Curious. What's this? Open it, he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. Inside was a delicate bracelet, the kind I'd admired years ago but had never bought for myself. Engraved on the inside were the words, "For every tomorrow. Together." Tears filled my eyes as I looked up at him. Mark, this is beautiful. So are you, he said softly, and I don't ever want to lose sight of that again. In that moment, I realized that we'd come full circle, not back to where we started, but to a place where we could begin again, stronger and more resilient than before. As we drove home the next day, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. Our journey had been painful, but it had also been transformative. The cracks in our relationship had let the light in, illuminating the parts of ourselves we needed to heal. When we pulled into the driveway, I turned to Mark and said, "I think we're going to be okay." He smiled, his hand reaching for mine. "I know we will be." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Looking back, the storm we weathered felt like both a test and a lesson. It taught us the importance of honesty, of communication, and of never taking each other for granted. Our love wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was worth fighting for. What would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever faced a challenge that made you question everything but ultimately brought you closer to the ones you love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the resilience